Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and since switching over to the Mac Studio as my primary studio computer, I've been looking for an affordable, multifunctional Thunderbolt hub to pair it with. And after buying and subsequently returning a couple, Yottamaster sent me their MS5-T3 Thunderbolt 3 10-in-1 hub, which checked all the boxes. It even checked an extra box, which is great, but then it didn't check a box that I didn't even know needed to be checked, which turns out is bad and may mean my search continues, but let's check it out.
It's the money.
Okay guys, this should be a quick one. We're gonna unbox the hub and accessories, check out the specs and features, hook it up to my Mac Studio and my Windows laptop, do some speed and performance testing, and we'll finish up with pros, cons, and my overall thoughts. Let's go. In the box is the 10-in-1 hub, an enormous 120 watt power brick, a 1/2 meter Thunderbolt 3 cable, a couple of thermal pads, and a small screwdriver. On the front of the hub are two 5 gigabit Type A ports, a 10 gigabit Type A port, a 10 gigabit USB Type C port, and a 3.5 millimeter combo headphone microphone jack. On the back of the hub is a DisplayPort 1.4 output, the 40 gigabit Thunderbolt input port, and a 40 gigabit Thunderbolt 3 output, a gigabit Ethernet port, and the 120 watt DC input. Flipping the hub over, we discover the hub is also a 2-bay M.2 SSD enclosure, which holds one NVMe SSD and one SATA M.2 SSD, in which I installed a Gen 3 M.2 NVMe SSD and a Gen 3 M.2 SATA SSD. For setup, I connected the Yottamaster hub to my base model M1 Max Mac Studio. I used the Thunderbolt 3 output to connect my primary 4K 60Hz display using a USB-C to DisplayPort cable. The second 4K 60Hz display is connecting using the DisplayPort output. And I connected the Ethernet port to my 2.5 gigabit home network. On the front 5 gigabit Type A port, I have my RF mouse dongle and my Behringer DAC connected. My 4K capture card is plugged into the 10 gigabit Type A port. And finally, I'm using the 10 gigabit Type C port to connect my Samsung T7 external SSD. I also ran all the same tests on my Framework laptop, which is Thunderbolt 4, and I'll just mention those results if they differ significantly from the Mac. Now, before I get into testing the hub without getting into a Thunderbolt and USB protocol masterclass, I should address the fact that this is a Thunderbolt 3 hub, while the Mac Studio and my laptop are Thunderbolt 4, so is there a performance loss? And the simple answer is no. The only major difference between Thunderbolt 3 and 4 are the minimum standards. TB3 has a lower minimum standard, but is capable of meeting most of the TB4 standards. And in the case of the Yottamaster hub, it meets most of the Thunderbolt 4 standards, like one 8K or two 4K displays, the 10 gigabit USB protocol. The only significant difference is how the different lanes of data and video are transferred. This Thunderbolt 3 hub isn't going to be capable of hitting some of the up to 3000 megabyte per second storage speeds you see on some Thunderbolt 4 NVMe enclosure. If all the ports and bays are used, the NVMe drive is limited to 10 gigabit per second or 1250 megabytes per second, and SATA speeds are limited to 6 gigabits or 750 megabytes per second. Now, the stated maximum read-write speeds of the various drives and things we'll be connecting to this and testing are all theoretical best sequential read and write speeds and never actual speeds you get in real-world use. So to test realistic speeds, I'm using the Blackmagic Drive speed test. I validated this tool on these systems, comparing it to actual transfer speeds of multiple small and large files, and it's accurate. So let's start with the installed M.2 drives. The NVMe drive I'm using is a 256 gigabyte Inland Professional Gen 3 SSD and has theoretical speeds of 1100 megabytes per second write and 1900 megabytes per second read. And our disk speed test shows 550 megabytes per second write and 1567 megabytes per second read, which real quick math says that's about 25% faster read speeds than the 10 gigabit theoretical limit of the hub. And that's because of all the different ports and connections on this hub. The NVMe slot utilizes the Thunderbolt 3 PCIe lane, so 10 gigabit is the minimum speed dedicated to that port. if the PCIe lanes aren't being utilized by something else, the NVMe drive can use them to work faster. In fact, because I have something plugged into the Thunderbolt downstream port, the hub has dedicated some of the PCIe bandwidth for that port, even though it's just a display. So if I unplug that cable, giving the NVMe more bandwidth, and run the test, you see that we're now getting really close to the maximum speeds of the SSD. Now, the only two connections on the hub that use the PCIe lanes are the NVMe and Thunderbolt downstream ports, so all the other speeds I'm going to test now aren't affected. So looking at the SATA SSD, I'm using a Western Digital Blue M.2 SATA SSD with write and read speeds of 530 and 560 megabytes per second respectively, and we get tested speeds of 420 and 426 megabytes per second, which is actually pretty close to the speeds I get on that SSD when it's directly installed in a desktop motherboard. Let's look at the 10 gigabit USB-C port, and to test this, I'm using a Samsung T7 external USB-C 3.2 Gen 2 SSD, and this has sequential read and write speeds of 1000 megabytes per second. And on the 10 gigabit USB-C port on the Yottamaster, we get write speeds of 478 and read speeds of 593. Connecting the T7 to the front 10 gigabit USB-C port on the Mac Studio gives us much faster write times at 646, but interestingly, slower read times at 519 megabytes per second. Now, this is way below the 10 gigabit speed of the port and the actual T7 speed, and that's because Mac only uses UASP protocol, which makes external SSDs faster if the SSD is formatted in Apple's newer APFS format. So even though this drive is formatted with an Apple HFS Plus file system, so it will actually work with my cameras, it won't hit max speeds over USB. That's an Apple issue, not Yottamaster issue, but because the T7 does use NVMe protocol instead of SATA, if I connect it to the Thunderbolt downstream port on the hub, we now get write and read speeds of 720 and 750 megabytes per second respectively. And again, on the Mac Thunderbolt 4 port, it gets slightly faster write speeds and slightly lower read speeds. Again, write speeds make sense, not 100% sure on the Mac slower read speeds. Now, the next port I want to test is the Ethernet port, because by auto negotiate, assume that means the port will work, albeit at just a gigabit speed, no matter what speed port you connect it to, which is almost the case. My studio is all connected to a 2.5 gigabit access point switch, which is connected to a 2.5 gigabit router. And if I do a simple internet speed test connected to the Mac, I do get the max speeds for my ISP of greater than a gig. But connected to the Yottamaster Hub's Ethernet port, I don't even hit gigabit download speeds. And if I test the speed to my server, which is only connected to a gigabit access point switch at the moment, new hardware on the way for a whole home network upgrade, so be sure to subscribe for that. But again, on the Mac, I get 100 megabyte speeds, which is just slightly slower from what I expect across the gigabit switch, while on the hub, we only get about 75 megabytes per second. So there's definitely an issue there. Now, this is one test that differed some on the Windows laptop in that I was able to get slightly faster internet download speeds of 830 megabits per second, but that's still short of max speeds, and LAN speeds were faster, but not where they could be. So that covers the relevant speed testing, but let's really give the Yottamaster a torture test and see how it holds up to using every single port and connection on it simultaneously. Okay, one last real world ultimate test for this Yottamaster Thunderbolt 3 hub. I am capturing primary audio through my Behringer DAC, secondary audio through my headset. I'm monitoring audio through my headset. 4K videos being captured on my AverMedia 4K capture card. All of this is going through the Yottamaster hub. The video and audio is being recorded to the NVMe drive in the hub. While all that's going on, I'm going to take a 6.3 gigabyte file from the Mac and drag it on to the Samsung card that's attached to the hub. And then I'm going to take about 6 gigabytes of files from the SATA drive in the hub, and I'm going to pass them to my server through the network. all of this is going on through the hub. I think I've completely maxed out the capacity of the hub, plus the two 4K displays are attached also to the hub. That test was actually pretty impressive and actually lasted much longer than the small edited segment you saw. But it's time for the pros and cons, and first pro is price. This 10-in-1 hub cost under $300. Compare that to the Apple-centric hubs from OWC, CalDigit, Belkin. Those multifunction hubs with comparable expandability come at a cost of near $400. Even the small hubs like the 5-port OWC hub or the CalDigit Element cost almost as much as this. This is a pro because the Yottamaster actually does, for the most part, work with the M1 Mac right out of the box, and it's the first of the 3 or 4 non-Apple specific Thunderbolt hubs that I've tested to do so. With the exception of the Ethernet port, which I guess will have to go in the cons list, speeds on the connected ports and installed SSDs are good and right in line with what you get with a direct connection to the computer. The inclusion of the M.2 bay is a big bonus and wasn't a feature I was even looking for, but with the NVMe speeds, it would fit great into my workflow. I do a lot of either direct OBS screen capture or external video capture through the capture card, and having an expandable external option for recording to and editing from is great. The SATA drive is good for basic file storage. Personally, I would have liked to see that bandwidth directed to maybe another 10 gigabit USB-C port, but that's just me. The dedicated DisplayPort is a nice feature, as most modern displays have DisplayPort 1.4 input. It also allows you to use the Thunderbolt downstream port to daisy chain more Thunderbolt expansion if you want, or in my case, being able to use it to drive another display. Now the cons. I already mentioned the less than a gigabyte Ethernet port, more so on the Mac than the PC, so I won't beat that one up anymore. The next con is another more on the Apple side of things, and the problem with multiple displays and attached external storage and waking from sleep or restarting the system. It's been a problem with my M1 Mac Mini, my M1 iMac, the M1 Max Mac Studio. When the Mac wakes from sleep or you restart the system, the displays just randomly change orientation, and external SSDs have been improperly ejected, dozens of times in some cases. However, the internal M.2 drives seem to be immune to this. However, a problem I've run into a lot with this hub connected, I've come back to the system after being away for a while, and at some point the system has crashed and restarted due to a problem. This is a new one. So just like all the other Macs I own with connected hubs, I just have to set it to never sleep. Now, I haven't done as much testing on the PC, but in the time I've used the Yottamaster with my laptop, there have been none of those issues. Another con is the giant power brick this thing comes with. I mean, this thing is bigger than the hub itself, and GaN or gallium nitride power bricks are a thing now. This is a 120 watt GaN power supply. The difference is significant. Now, those aren't deal breakers for me. The biggest problem I have with this hub, and what may ultimately force me to remove it from my setup, is, well, I'll just demonstrate. Yeah, it's loud. Not just loud, but loud at an annoying pitch. And it's due to this little blower style fan that sucks air in one side and blows it laterally across the internals and out the other side. It works exactly like a blower style GPU, and it's just about as loud. Now, if you have this connected to a big gaming laptop or something that also is loud, then probably not a big deal. But I have it connected to a dead silent Mac Studio, and speaking of studios, it's the only thing in my studio that makes noise, so I can hear it always. The exact sound might not come through on video, but it sounds like water running through copper pipes, like there are copper water pipes running along my desk. I don't know. Am I being overcritical here? Have I been spoiled since switching from my big, loud, hot PC workstation to a small, cool, and quiet Mac Studio? I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. To summarize, I think Yottamaster made a great Thunderbolt hub with some of the best features for the price currently on the market that actually works well with both Mac and Windows. However, while it won't cost you a lot of dollars, it comes with the cost of a lot of decibels. So if you agree with that summary, be sure to hit that like. If you don't, let me know why in the comments. And if you want more info on the Yottamaster 10-in-1 Thunderbolt 3 hub, there's a link in the description below. If you're looking for a less expensive hub, you can check out my review of the Acasis 10-in-1 USB-C hub and SSD enclosure here. And be sure to subscribe for future content, and I'll see you all in the next one.